So today we're continuing on with our series, our book series, You Can't Sleep Through Your Awakening.
That's right.
I left the book down there.
One probably has done that, and it doesn't work very well.
It doesn't work very well.
We'll talk about that today.
Would you grab that? I think it's under my, yeah. So we're going to sit down. Welcome.
Very good. Thank you. So comfortable.
Absolutely. Welcome back. So thank you. You can, there we go. Thank you, Ralph. Yeah. So this is the book, and this is the book study. And you're, I think we might have some more books, or are we out of books? We have books. So if you have a need for a book, you could pick that up here or let us know. We'll try to get that off to you. But it's an amazing book, and we're so enjoying it. But the best thing is to get into a book study so you can have these conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're sort of doing today. We're going to be talking about the theme of this book and the particular chapters. And what we notice about that is we don't all see things the same way, but we all have a perspective that gives us, another aspect of how it is to awaken together and awaken in our own minds and our hearts and have the experience of sharing it with others. So it seems like there's a reason we're all gathered together, two or more, as Jesus said, that there I am in the midst of you. So we are here to demonstrate that and also to get clear ourselves on these teachings. I think
that's it.
important.
You and I, every time we look at this idea of waking up, that we go deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was thinking this morning that it's really lovely that there's this classic story that when the Buddha had his enlightenment experience, that he was walking on the road and a man stopped him because he noticed noticed Buddha's radiance, probably noticed Jesus' radiance too, but that was another time, and noticed his radiance and his peacefulness and stopped him and said, "What are you? Are you a celestial being, or are you a god?" And Buddha said, "No." He said, "Well, then are you a magician or a wizard?" And Buddha said, "No." The man said, "Well, then are you a man?" And Buddha said, "No." And he said, "Well, then what are you?" And Buddha said, "I am awake. I am awake." I think it sounds so simple for us to think in terms of being awake as being enlightened, because we think in terms of the body, waking up from a sleep. But this is a different kind of a wakefulness. It's waking up from illusion of feeling separate from God, feeling separate from life and love and other people, that whole notion of feeling very vulnerable and alone. And that's not the spiritual reality.
Right.
So we're waking up from that.
So do you think waking up is hard to do?
I could break into a song right now, but I'll leave that for Zamar.
Do down down, comma down doobie do down down, comma down doobie do down down. Waking up is hard to do.
That's exactly it. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Just the voice of angels that are just synchronized with our talks right now. That's our wonderful Zamar. Well, we actually will probably have a song coming in future weeks we're talking about.
Yes.
That will be the theme song of Waking Up with those wonderful words. I wanted to take it down for a moment, get serious. That won't last long, I'm sure. And this idea of why is it so hard for us to wake up? Or what is it that's happening with us when we struggle with this waking up process? And what came to me was the thought that in the story of John the Baptist, who was the forerunner of Jesus, he was sort of the spiritual giant until Jesus came on the scene. And what it was about John the Baptist that was characteristic of him was that he was extremely intellectual, and he had really mastered the understanding of spirituality and had this intellectual perception. And I think some of us maybe maybe it's me, but I think a lot of people who are in their mind a lot and try to understand spirituality as an activity of cognition, of intellectual understanding. This is sort of what John the Baptist, he really shone in this idea of understanding spiritually in the mind. And then Jesus came along, and John the Baptist recognized in Jesus someone who embodied this understanding, that it wasn't just an intellectual perception, but it was a knowing that was the very essence of his being. And John the Baptist said, "I must decrease and he must increase," referencing Jesus. And so it's that notion that, for us to awaken spiritually, we have to rely less upon the appearances of life and the way that we perceive the world and the way we make sense out of reality using our senses, and to reduce that so that we can get into a different aspect of the way that we perceive life and the perception of life from the heart is what we're talking about that today.
Yes.
So,
And when he says he must increase, but I must decrease, I also can read that in a way of the aspect of self. There's this part of me that is very human, right? And there's an egoic aspect to the self. And that's what needs to decrease so that the divine in me can be a greater expression. So I can read it that way as well. Yeah.
yes.
So that is in the world needs to decrease, and the Christ that's coming, Jesus, needs to increase. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, maybe if we drill down into this idea of what it means to have human perception, there's a wonderful metaphor that was given to me. It's not my original idea. But knowing that our minds are very much like a computer, and we all understand, well, most of us understand how computers work, and computers work on a binary system. And our minds oftentimes work on a binary system, which is necessary for us to make sense of the world. We separate objects, and we see distinctions between things, and we see opposites. And those are all aspects of a binary operating system. That is how our mind operates. But the problem with that is that what we're talking about, this enlightenment, is not binary. It is wholeness. It is oneness.
Yeah.
It isn't this and that. There is just one reality, one presence, one power, one love, one life. Oneness is the game. And when we're stuck in a binary orientation to life, and we're trying to see ourselves as subject and then everything outside of ourselves as object, we're sort of stuck in this dualism that keeps us feeling separate from the one, separate from love and life and each other. And so it's more than just understanding the spiritual stuff. It's really shifting out of, or as your meditation or the daily word said today, it's about letting go of this human perception so that we can sort of move into this part of ourselves that is connected with a knowing of oneness, not a concept of oneness, but where we do not see separation, where we feel the connection with all of life.
It's the non-dual, right? Non-dual approach.
Non-dual,
The one
yes.
presence and one power.
Yes.
And isn't it interesting as a species that we're actually designed to notice and focus on the negative? That's so interesting to me. That rather than the positive, we have this survival mechanism in us that is focused on what's missing, broken, and not working.
Like what can hurt us?
What?
Like what can hurt us?
What can
we're more
hurt us?
concerned about.
Yeah. So Rick Hansen is the author of the Buddha Brain, and many of you have read that. And he talks about the analogy between Velcro and Teflon. And so I love that because sometimes we just let the positive or the wonderful things just fall away like Teflon, and we use the difficult ones and let them attach to us as Velcro. And as spiritual awakened beings, we want to reverse that, right? We want to begin to let go of the challenges, let go of the things that harm us and embrace the good and the great. Yeah.
Yeah, and isn't it more like the reaction to things as being what sort of is the negative aspect of us that predominates? Because sometimes we can't affect what happens to us, but it's the reactivity that is sort of what we seem to be wired for,
Right.
humanly.
And sometimes we need that, right? Like if there really is a bear in the forest, right? And we're walking along and singing, a lovely song, and we notice a bear. We don't want to stay in la la land and not do something, right? We want to be mindful enough to say, warning, warning, something needs to happen. I think the difficulty comes is when we bring that same intensity that the world is coming to the end or the tiger or the bear is chasing me by interpreting life in that way. So one question that I love to do is something happens or someone says something and then I make meaning out of that. So I want to say, so what am I making this mean? There's a bear in the woods. That's dangerous. But there's a person, at the party that I haven't liked, but I treat them like they're the bear because of some amygdala thinking. So we want to be mindful and inquire into how is it that we can respond to life with so big triggers, right? The big triggers.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic that has happened to me, and I'm sure many people, is that we end up projecting our past on the present, on other people, particularly other people.
Yes.
Other people remind us of someone in our life who we were afraid of, or who, whoops, there goes my paper. We do
I'll
have a
get it
fan
for you,
here.
darling.
My fan will help me from the fan, thank you. So we know that's sort of a dynamic that we just become aware of. That's
Yes.
what I hear you saying.
Yes.
That it's not that we don't want to be, we don't want to take care of ourselves. We do want to take care of ourselves and protect
Right.
ourselves, but sometimes it goes way too far and keeps us from the intention of connecting.
That's right.
Yeah.
So back to that, just, not the bear, but the person in the room that you're triggered by because of some previous experience. What's happening right then, that moment, is really probably nothing. There's no conversation, there's no exchange, but there's a memory of, danger, danger for this person. So I've got this quote that we're going to share today on our PowerPoint, and it's from Marcus Aurelius. And it's beautiful. It says this: if you are pained by external things, it's not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. And it is your power to wipe out that judgment now. So we also have the power to begin to see that it is my suffering is not so much caused by that person that's in the room, but by my thoughts about that person in the room. So the projection, right, is they're there, they're causing my suffering. But the reality is they're just there, right? They haven't done anything, but the thoughts and the judgments about what that person is what's causing the suffering.
And I think that is where we kind of get tripped up, is that even though we know this, and you and I can agree that, it isn't really that person, it's the story that we make up.
Yeah.
And I think what we're really working towards as we awaken spiritually is to become more familiar with that part of us that is not triggered. And that's the part of us that is always peaceful. That's the part of us that does not need life to be a certain way for us to be okay. And we, through the practices that have been taught here, the Q process and nonviolent communication, begin to understand that our feelings are not who we are. Even our most dramatic feelings, even extreme feelings of extreme happiness or extreme sadness or extreme fear, those are things that come and go in my experience. And because they come and go, then they can't be who I am. Because all the while that these are coming and going, I'm still here.
I'm still here.
You know, this sense of being conscious and aware or awake. And the more I'm aware of that sort of witness to life, the less I become identified with the fear that may show up in my feelings, but I'm not identified with it. And
Yes.
we begin to tease ourselves away from the identity of our experiences, as opposed to becoming those experiences, like I am mad or I am afraid, or we are not. Our I am is none of those things. I may have fear and I may have sadness and I may have disappointments. All those feelings, they are part of what's arising in my experience, but it's not who I am. Who I am is the witness, the
That's
ever-present, consciousness that is unaffected. And that's what awakening means to me.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just becoming aware of that. So it's a sort of awareness becoming aware of itself, right? So it's behind this earthly experience. It's becoming the observer or the witness to the one who is doing. So wakefulness is not a doing experience. It's actually happens without any efforting. It happens when we actually let go and relax and surrender. It's a surrendering to what already is. And in other words, we don't have to do anything or become any more to be awake. We actually need to be less. We need to do less, because it's sort of a softening. It's sort of allowing that wakefulness to be known, right?
Yes, exactly. And it was Einstein who said that this mind of us that feels separate from everyone and everything is an optical delusion of consciousness.
Optical delusion.
Optical delusion of consciousness. And, this is someone who was a scientist, essentially, but he, even in his scientific orientation, he recognized that our perception of how we see things, we miss the connection between all of life. We miss sort of this tapestry of life that has us all connected and from which we all emerge and are constantly never separated from. And we have created this separation from and the need to make sense of the physical world.
Yes.
But what we never really lose this
Yeah.
this oneness feeling and awareness. It just sort of goes to sleep, and that really seems accurate.
Yeah.
Because when I wake up from that, I see life very differently, and it's the blessing of waking up.
And I believe we've all had these spiritual awakenings starting at a very young age. As you know, writing a book, and I'm sharing all those experiences of when my soul began to experience itself and waking up. But I remember one time, I'll just share briefly, we were in Tahoe. We lived in South Lake Tahoe, and another beautiful place on the planet, just like here. And I was preparing for a Sunday talk there. I was the minister there. And we were doing a series on the power of now with Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle. And so I took my CDs. Remember CDs back in the day? And I went into the aspen grove. And I brought my water and my lunch. And I sat in the aspen groves. And I listened to Eckhart Tolle. And I began to expand my mind, but mostly open my heart. So I spent time in the silence. I spent time listening to this quiet voice. Eckhart Tolle, as you know, is sort of drone-like. He's got this real slow tone, and some people think they go to sleep listening to him, but I love his tone. But what happened in that aspen grove was I completely sort of left my body and was just there, right around my body, and my awareness blended into everything that was in that space. The trees and the animals, and my expanded awareness just popped open. And it was a miraculous encounter, and it went on for quite some time. And I didn't want it to end, and it sort of faded, and it took many, many hours. But those are sort of not the ordinary kind of wakefulness. There's many, many ordinary ones. But what it was is you begin to disidentify with the separate self. That's wakefulness. When I'm no longer identified as a sense of a separate self, and you unite with all that is. There's a complete oneness with all that is.
That's so beautiful. And, those are the experiences, I think, that if we have doubted the presence of something greater, of a transcendent reality, when we have those experiences, those are like, all the doubt sort of goes out the window. And we want to be back in those experiences again. I think some spiritual teachers describe that as the dissolution of the ego.
Yes.
Where the ego, which we would define as the separate sense of self, actually dissolves. Actually, it doesn't really exist in the first place, but the feeling of being separate, which is what the ego is, it's not a reality. It's a belief that has taken form in our minds. When that dissolves, then what's left is the reality. So
yes.
You didn't experience something extraordinary. You actually experienced something, a greater truth and reality of the connection.
And I got into my heart. I got out of the mind that is trying to figure out the truth, figure out our lives. And it leaves us questioning everything. And I just dropped down into the heart. And that's where seeing is so clear.
Yes.
Yeah. There's this beautiful clip we wanted to.
You want to know what's real? This. This. This is real. Maybe the part that knows the waking from the dream. Maybe it isn't here. But maybe it's here. I need to believe that something extraordinary is possible.
It's so beautiful to realize that all we really need to do sometimes is to move out of this discursive thought that has us in our suffering, where we're trying to figure out life, where we're trying to always put ourselves in defense of ourselves, or in protection of ourselves, or trying to figure out how life could be okay so that we could finally be okay, which is all those are notions of separation. And to move finally into the heart is when something extraordinary can happen, which means that I no longer need life to be a certain way for me to be okay, because now I'm connected with the truth of my being. Now I'm connected to the part of me that is whole, that is complete, that is not suffering, that is not lacking, or there's no limitation.
Because it's exhausting, isn't it, to try to get everyone to do what is pleasing and comfortable for me, right?
We gave that up on each other.
We gave that up,
didn't we?
yeah. But when we really believe that our pain and suffering comes from outside of ourselves, that the world or this circumstance or this person is the cause of our suffering, then we are victimized and disempowered, and we could never find our way, right? But when we finally wake up and get that the suffering doesn't come from the painful experience itself. It comes from the beliefs that get created of what we make up about the situation. That's where the suffering is. It's not in that person. It's not even in the situation, because that's over with. It's not in the now. The suffering is staying stuck in how it should have been. They shouldn't have said that. They shouldn't have done that. The world shouldn't have been that way. And it is, as Byron Katie says, the only time I suffer is when I argue with reality. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a lovely way of seeing this from A Course in Miracles. And A Course in Miracles, talks extensively about forgiveness. And but it doesn't talk about forgiveness in the way that the ordinary garden variety that we often think about forgiveness. It talks about forgiveness in the notion that I forgive not for what happened, but I forgive for what did not happen. I forgive because nothing anybody could ever do or has ever done could ever separate me from my oneness with God.
Beautiful.
And because that could never happen, that is how something extraordinary can happen in our relationships, is that if we have to kind of justify what somebody has done before we can forgive them, then we never really, we can never do that, because our story will always say they shouldn't have done that, and how dare they, and et cetera, et cetera. But when we become familiar with that part of us, the heart-centered part of us that's connected with love, and we know that that can never be taken from us, then something extraordinary can happen.
Right.
And the forgiveness comes not as a superficial act, but as a shift from the head into the heart. And I think probably the hardest thing for us to do in a lifetime is to make that shift. But that's where all the juice is. That's where all the bliss and the peace and everything we're looking for.
So in the book, Dr. Jane talks about an acronym using for transformational practices of the heart. She calls it the FACE practice, F-A-C-E. And the first F is for forgiveness. The second letter A is for appreciation. The third letter C is for compassion. And the fifth letter E is for embodiment. So I'd like to do a closing prayer and sort of lead us into the face of God, and but also into the heart. So the mind has difficulty with forgiveness, as you said, Larry, but the heart is where the work happens. So let's do a practice in the heart as we close. So just invite you now to close your outer eye and completely surrender right now to this loving presence that wants only for your good. And become aware of the energy and the focus that might be in the head, and bring it all the way down into the heart. Dropping that down into the heart center. And then breathe as though you can breathe through this beautiful heart. Slowly and rhythmically. And now radiate the feeling of appreciation. Something that is so easy for you. A newborn baby, a precious pet, a sacred place you go. Focus on the heart. Breathe through the heart. Radiate the feeling of appreciation. So from this place, continuing to drop into the heart, we open up into this beautiful electromagnetic field that's surrounding you now, with the protection of the divine, radiating a vibration of appreciation. And just allowing the heart to forgive whatever is needed. just forgive. I let go and let God. I of myself in my head cannot do this, but I in my heart can. I let go. And I appreciate that this life experience has brought to me an awareness of self that needs to heal. And I have compassion for myself and for the other. And right now, I embody the Christ. The one who forgives, the one who loves, the one who offers compassion, even for those who don't deserve. I am the one. And the Christ in me does this work. So take a holy breath. God is, I am, it is done. I am whole, and I am ready to be my most magnificent self here on earth in this moment, in this embodiment. And for that, we say, thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen and amen. Bless you.